Date is December 13, 2010. We are interviewing Dr. Victoria E. Blank. My name is Agnes Vertes. Our cameraman is Julian Reitman, and this is for the Jewish Historical Society of Southern Fairfield County.
You can talk.
My name is Agnes Vertes, and I am interviewing Victoria Blank, MD. Today is December 13th, 2010, and the cameraman is Julian Reitman, and this is for the Jewish Historical Society of Southern Fairfield County. Vicky, tell me about something about before you came to this country.
Ooh, I have a lot to tell you about.
Okay.
I was quite old already by the time I came, but I would like to tell you, what do you want to know? You know, we went through the war, through World War II, and I came from Belgium, so we were occupied by the Nazis, we underwent the Holocaust, sanctions and difficulties, but I can tell you about myself before the war and during and after if you want to. Before the war, I was a little girl. I went to regular city school in Belgium, Antwerp, Belgium, which was a Flemish part, which is located in the Flemish part of Belgium. My parents both came from Turkey, because we're Sephardic Jews, and they didn't speak any Flemish, but I was obliged to go to the Flemish school. So my parents knew mostly Ladino and French.
Yeah,
And
let's take a break.
Okay,
When were you born and where?
I was born in Antwerp, Belgium, on July 29, 1927.
And what was the language that you first spoke, your mother tongue?
My mother tongue really is French, because my parents, who came from Turkey as Sephardic Jews and installed themselves first in France and then in Belgium, knew French quite well. They had been to the Alliance Israelite schools in the Middle East, so they spoke French. And they didn't know any Flemish, which was the language of the part of Belgium where we were living. So I had to learn some Flemish while I was going to school. My father was a businessman who owned a chocolate little manufacturing business where we made our own pralines. And where we had we had a big store with 3 big windows, and so one of the workers always sat at the window with chocolate in a double boiler and took the contents of each praline one by one, dipped them in sugar in chocolate, and would decorate them if necessary, and the fillings were wonderful. They were made of nuts and almonds and pineapples and cherries in alcohol and all kinds of marzipan, you name it. And all this was made in the cellar of the building where we used to live and where the store was. We lived above the store. And so, to tell you something about my childhood, that is really remarkable in my mind, which really hits me, is the wonderful place where I was raised, with all these wonderful things around. And every day when I came home from school, I would ask my father, can I take a praline? And he would say yes. So I would wash my hands and would go where all the contents were, and with each one of my fingers I would go and lick this one and this one, pots of heavy cream, which I adore, but I still adore it. And so I'm really very much in love with chocolate. And I want to, jumping around in time, I want to tell you that when the war was over in Belgium, it took quite a long time before we had chocolate again. So that the moment the chocolate came back on the market, I used it for breakfast, lunch and supper, and developed some obesity, not obesity, but overweight, which really had a very big influence in my life, because this was always hanging over my head, that I would become heavy again after I had lost my weight. And that's why I became a bariatrician later in life. So, yes, you wanted to ask me something.
Tell me about your experiences during World War II, that is the Holocaust.
World War II was a very traumatic period in our lives, of course, but it started when the Germans attacked Belgium. Practically the whole country left Belgium to go to the coast of France, where the Channel is, with the hope probably of escaping the German invasion. The most terrible thing happened during that part of the war, because there were thousands and thousands of people on the road, the same way you see them in any country where there are refugees. It's a very, very difficult time for refugees to be on the roads with whatever little luggage they may have. They come into villages where there is not enough food, there are no facilities, no water, nothing is available. People are sleeping on the ground. We were lucky enough to be in a car, because a friend of my father had a car, and we traveled with him, his wife, his father, my grandmother, my father, my brother, my mother and myself. So we were a lot of people already in that car, and a little later, when the whole Belgian army was defeated, some soldiers were trying to escape also, and I remember that there were 4 soldiers hanging on top of the car just to get away. It is during that time that somebody, a Flemish person, who was a little businessman, was able to find some help from my family in France. The family had a house near the beach over there, and they took in this Flemish family, the husband, wife and daughter, and I guess they helped them. And I am telling you this because I want you to know about the way people react to various situations. Anyway, we ended up in the south of France. Before we got to the south of France, in Marseilles, where we stayed, my mother, my grandmother, and my brother and myself. When we were around Bordeaux or Toulouse, I don't remember, my father went back to Belgium to see what was going on with our house and our store and so on and so forth. And we stayed in Marseille, where we had a very difficult time finding a place to live in or to organize ourselves. Eventually, after different episodes, we found a place in a hotel, and it was a hotel on a public place over a building in a very large public place. And I remember probably the welfare people in France were all sitting on the ground for lunch, and they had newspapers on the floor, and they would come and feed them, and to my amazement they all got wine. That was very strange to me. I thought wine was something very luxurious, but obviously these people were getting wine. We also had a very interesting experience. My mother, my grandmother were not involved in that, But I was registered in school and I went to Marseille and I developed the southern French accent. And in the morning we had a very exciting time because the hotel where we were lodging had bedbugs. And so my brother and I were very upset about those bedbugs biting us through the night and waking us up. So we made an agreement that he would get a glass of water next to his bed and so would I. And when the bugs would bother us, we would just catch them and put them in the glass. In the morning, this was a very exciting. Who got the most of all the bugs? So even though the war was a very terrible thing, there were some very, very funny things happening. My brother was quite handsome and he was about 15, 16 years old, and he had to stand online for bread. So all the girls liked him very much, so we sometimes got a little extra bread under the table. But other than that, it was a miserable time, and my mother would be trying to get a place for us to live, which she eventually found above a movie in Marseille. And I must tell you that the most amazing thing about the movie is that we were above the movie and we had no electricity. We had gas to lighten us. And we had 3 rooms and there was one arm with a gas flame possible, and you had to move the arm from one place, from one room to the other to have light. And one day we left it in the middle so the 3 rooms would be lit, and the wood above it became red and we were going to have a fire. So we learned our lesson there and we didn't have a fire. The apartment was very clean and very nice, and unfortunately my grandmother died there, and I vaguely remember how my brother and I stayed with her the last night that she died, and I think we probably fell asleep while she was dying. My mother was absolutely exhausted and my father was still in Belgium, and we tried to go back to Belgium, and my father said, "Don't come back." And we were so homesick and so unhappy that we really insisted that we wanted to go back, and they arranged for us to go back. However, the arrangement was that there would be 3 cars coming back to Belgium. Unfortunately, the people in one of the cars were English citizens who had lived all their lives in Belgium. And when we got to the demarcation line, we were all arrested, and eventually they were going to send us back to Marseille, which they did. But before that, they took us as hostages and put us, my brother and I, in one car from the train, in the train station, my mother and my grandmother in another one. And we were so well protected by the Germans, or watched by the Germans, that when we went outside in the toilet where they had some temporary facilities, we would have four soldiers, 4 Germans coming with us and waiting for us to finish whatever we had to do and bring us back to the car, to the train. So anyway, I don't remember how we went back to Marseille, and I don't have a clear remembrance, but I believe we went back to the same apartment. We were still able to go back to our apartment that we had there. And then we kept on complaining that we wanted to go back again, and my father said, no, don't come back, because things were starting to be very bad for the Jews. But yes, when I talked to you about the demarcation line, I presume you understand that France already was divided by supposedly free France and the rest of France, occupied France. So we were supposed to go back again. We were not supposed to go back again, but one of my uncles who lived in France came to visit us in Marseille and said, "Oh, I don't know why your husband is so difficult. You are so unhappy here, you definitely have to go." And eventually we got back to Belgium. And very shortly thereafter they started already to put all kinds of things, the Germans started to put all kinds of restrictions on the Jews. And we were supposed to have the Jewish star. The store got a big announcement, Jewish enterprise, and so on and so forth. My family, because they were Turkish, I don't know if it was because of the benevolence of the Turkish consul, or because he got some money from all the there was a little colony of Turkish people like us living in Antwerp and in Brussels. So he decided that he was going to tell the Germans that they couldn't touch us because they were a neutral country. And so we didn't have to wear the star, but we had all the other restrictions, which were that we could not be in public transportation except in the very back if it had several cars, and we had to stand, we couldn't sit, we couldn't go back to school, we had to be out of the streets at 6 o'clock at night, and we couldn't come back till I don't know what time in the morning. And so we were living a little bit under duress already. And I remember that when the Germans announced that we cannot go to school anymore, we, the kids, were very happy. We said, "Oh, we're on vacation, this is wonderful," right? So my aunt gathered all the children and she said, "Children, you don't know the terrible thing that is happening to you. The Germans want to deprive you of your education, and your education is the most important thing that you can have in your life, and you can take that anywhere you go. Just, it's in your hand, they can't take it out of you. So you need to study, you need to know things, you need to find a way to be educated." And so that always stayed with me, because she was an aunt that I don't really like. I didn't really like her. Now, later on, I understand her much better. She was rather strict, you know, so I didn't like her as a child. But I think that what she told us has stayed with us, really. So anyway, my parents tried to hide me, and I went to many different places. And I wanted to tell you about the family who stayed at my relatives' home during the exodus from Belgium, of all the Belgians, in the very beginning of the war, when they were trying to flee Belgium. This man, who had a wife and a child, came once to my father's store, where we had a big sign, and he said to my father, "I know you're in trouble, and I want to help you. Your family helped me, and I want to help you." And by the way, generally Antwerp and Flemish people were rather anti-Semitic, but this man came and offered help, and he kept some things that we had in the family, some pictures and a little service that I have, that was a birthday present and that I was very attached to. It was an elephant thing. I may even have it here, I don't know if I have it or not. But so he kept a few things, and very much at the end of this period where we were trying to hide, I went to various places. First I was for a week, I was in a convent. where they didn't want the picture of my brother, and they didn't want me to get undressed to take a bath. I had to stay with my clothes. It was very medieval, I would say, in thought. But at the end of the week, or when they had retreat, so nobody spoke for 3 or 4 days. But at the end of the retreat, they announced to me a very, very good news. They said to me that they would now I would be baptized, and then I can do my communion, and that was very. I should be very happy about that. During the 3 days of the where we couldn't talk, I had a nurse sister with me, and she would take me for several hours a day to the chapel, which was very dark, but there was a light shining on the Madonna, and she said, pray to her, she will protect you. Anyway, when they announced to me that I was going to be baptized and have my communion, even though I was still, when you are 13 years old during the war, the Second World War, you're very innocent. It's not like the kids nowadays at 16, they're already adults, you would say, and they know all the tricks. But I was very naive, but I realized that this was not right. And I said to them, to the Mother Superior, who I am sure was very well intended, because they are so deep into the religion that they want to save my soul and they want to save me. And so, but I said to her, I need to ask my parents' permission. And Mother Superior said to me, well, you won't see them again. I didn't know why I wouldn't see them again. And in fact, exactly 1 week after I was admitted there, my mother came to visit me, because my mother was still able to walk around and take the train to wherever I was hiding. And when she heard the story, she took me out of a convent. And from there I went to a different place, but this is a very long story. It was a castle in the Ardennes, and it was a wonderful place where I found out later everybody was either Jewish or underground. And there I had something that became quite important in my life that happened there. Many things happened, but I don't know how much time we have, so I will not tell you all the details. But for something that has had an importance in my life, I was sharing the room with somebody, with another girl, who I thought was very smart. And I always looked up to her, and she was older than I was, but short in stature. But we had the same room, and one of the teachers asked her once, and what do you plan on doing when you grow up? What would you like to be in life? And she immediately said, I want to be a doctor. And then he asked me, the little stupid, innocent one, and what do you want to be? I never thought about that. I said, I want to be a doctor too. So that was the end of that. So I had told officially that I want to be a doctor, right? But anyway, after this, unfortunately, first of all, the castle had some terrible things happen to it. First of all, an English plane was hit by the whatever they were sending into the air, and pieces of the plane fell all over the area where the castle was, and the Germans were looking for the English people, if they had been served or not, just the soldiers, right? The pilots of the plane, And so they were going to come to visit the castle. And in the chapel of the castle were arms. They were hiding arms, and everything fell down. And they knew the Germans would come, and I understand there was a big panic, and I don't know how they hid them. Because the Germans came and they didn't find them. However, later on, in the meantime, I left the castle because I was terribly homesick to be so far away. You know, that was a whole trip now to the Ardennes from Antwerp, and my parents were still in the store, and they were still looking for a place for my brother to hide eventually. But while I wasn't there, eventually the Germans came. They took a lot of the children and they put them in the camp near Malines, where they would export them to Germany. And they killed they killed, I believe, the director of school. But some people escaped, including my cousins who were hidden there also. One of them was able to escape because when they had adults also come to the castle, and the day that the Germans came, then started to look around and question the director of the school. He had the opportunity to tell the girl who was hidden with me, who was sharing the room with me, the one who was going to be a doctor. She was amongst the smartest. I told you she was smart, and I always admired her. He told her to go quickly to the railroad station because they had a telegram saying 3 packets will be mailed to you. So, and they were supposed to arrive that day. Those 3 packets were my uncle, my aunt, and another cousin of mine. So 2 of the children of that family were already in the castle, and 3 others were going to come. And and she said, and after you do that, you come back and you take one of my cousins and you make him go, or he told him directly maybe, you have to go to this farm. He said, I can't go, I have my brother here and my cousins. And the director says, absolutely, you have to go. Get out of here. And my cousin had to leave the school. They killed the director, they took in everybody else who was not able to escape, and there were many refugees already from Germany who were cooks and who were professors supposedly, and all kinds of adults who were there, and all the children were put in what they called orphanage. So my cousins ended up in the orphanage, and one of them got very sick there and was eventually put in a hospital in Brussels, and I was able to see him while I was later on, that's several months later or I don't know time, I have no idea of time.
Where did you go?
Where did I go? To many other places. Eventually my parents got a telephone call saying, tonight is the night for the Turks. You better get out of it. And they were completely unprepared. So a friend of mine went to our English teacher because we were taking English classes, and she kept us just for a few days. She would be able to keep us there. And then my father and my mother had no place to go, and my father forgot money. That would be very important to have. He took some, but he forgot another bunch of it. And they left and they didn't know where to go. So they slept in bordellos for a couple of times. They had bordellos in Belgium, which was, you know what it is, until they could find a way to, they were not prepared at all for that. And I don't know where my brother went, but he went to a safe place, I guess. And my friend and I were at our teachers for a few days, and my mother was able to contact a Catholic woman who was the one who helped us get me into the convent. By the way, when they met my mother and family, I was 3 years old and they had never seen a Jew, and they wanted to take me to Mass on Sunday, and my mother said, no, she doesn't go to Mass because we are Jewish. Jewish! They couldn't believe that we were Jewish because they imagined us like complete. So we had been living with them. This was a vacation place. We had been living in their villa for already over a week. The whole family, the French part of the family, our Belgian family. So this was long before the war, of course. And that was 10 years ago. And this woman then became very good friends, and she let me come. So she put me first in the convent, then after I left the convent and after I had to leave the teacher, she took me into her house for a certain time. In the meantime, I remember going to Brussels, from Antwerp to Brussels, and guess how I went? The man from the fish store, the Flemish man who was hiding us, I remember I had just a little bag. I remember it, him holding the bag with one hand and holding my hand with his other hand, and we went on the train like we were Flemish. I didn't look so Jewish anyway, and he took me to Madame Ruben, who was the lady where I was going to stay. In the meantime, my parents found some way to Brussels, and they were hiding somewhere else. And their story is a long story again, but we all had to move during the war, and we were until just a few months before the end of the war, when we eventually, my parents each time escaped the Germans. They went to look for, they were unhappy where they went to look for a different place to hide, and when they came back to get their stuff, the Germans were there, and they were taking 19 Jews who were working in that place where they were hiding. Those 19 Jews had been there since a long time ago. They were all high-type German Jews, all intellectual and very rich people, and they had been exploited by the owner of the place, who was a lawyer, a gentleman farmer lawyer. He had exploited them, taking care of the horses and doing repairs in the house and all kinds of things, and making them pay through the nose. And when they had no more money, he went and he told the Germans, come and get them. These people are available for you. So that was that for those poor people. And my parents saw the trucks and the people going, and they never went back to that place. And so they had to find a new place, which they did. And again there, they saw the Germans coming in, and they were able to run out and never went back there. And then they found themselves in the street at the last place where I was, which was, there are a lot of stories to tell about that, but it was a baroness, and who lived alone, an older lady, and who I was placed with eventually. She didn't want to take me in the beginning because her nephew, he was one of the 7 judges, high court judges in Belgium, didn't want her to take any Jews. He was her only heir. But for some reason we got to her house and she couldn't refuse. She said, Roger said I cannot take her, but I'll take her, and I'll say that she's a refugee from the Belgian coast and that they were bombarded there and so on. And she took me as a maid, because she said, I don't need somebody to read to me, I need a maid. And my mother said, well, my daughter doesn't know how to do anything in the house, but maybe you can keep her. And to make a long story, she and a sister, an older sister that she had, who would come and visit her from the countryside every week, she took me in and she spoiled me and loved me as if I was her own child. She had no children. And the sister also. They were so good to me. And when I went to see my little cousin in the hospital, she had a heart condition, but she would come up to the stairs and she stood in the kitchen, and she herself, the Baroness, made a cake for my cousin so I could take him to the hospital, and all kinds of things. And she saw, my mother bought me a pair of shoes, new shoes, and when I first came to her, she said, "You need newspaper," and her sister brought her newspaper. She put newspaper in my new shoes to keep them nice, and she said, "You wear those one." And she gave me a uniform, and the uniform was too long. I was supposed to be the maid. So she herself sat on her knees and said, "And do you know how to sew?" And I knew how to sew. She said, "You sew that, and when it's done, you come downstairs." So I was on the 3rd floor, my bedroom. She was on the 2nd floor, and the 1st floor was dining room, kitchen, etc. And she said, "You don't have to get up on Sunday. Whenever you wake up, you can come down to my room." And it's late already, and I didn't hear any noise, so I go down, and what do I see? I smell gas. They used to put down the gas on and off, and she had a little thing in her room, and she had gas poisoning, and she was unconscious. And since she had been, I knew that she was a very sick person, and so first I opened windows, and she was still breathing. So I called the nuns who used to take care of her, and I saw the doctor's number. I called the doctor, then I called my mother where she was, and she got crazy that authorities would come and find me. So she arrived. She arrived with some cologne supposedly to revive the Baroness, but she was taken care of by the nuns and things worked out very well.
What happened to you after liberation?
After the liberation, first of all, when the liberation occurred, everybody was crazy. Everybody was kissing the English soldiers who were in Brussels. It was crazy, and we left the Baroness, and she said, "Does that mean you're going to leave me?" And we rented an apartment in Brussels, and she came to visit us and said one day, "I must love you a lot to come in this weather to visit you." And she had this beautiful dark suit and a hat with purple feathers, and it was snowing, and the snow ran along her face, blue lines, purple lines like this. And she came up the stairs, and she was short of breath, and she said, "I must love you a lot to come." She didn't want us to leave. And eventually she died from the gas. The same thing happened to her, and she died from it. But so this thing was that she had saved me, but she think that I had saved her, and so we were mutual saviors. Anyway, after the war, my parents rented a little apartment. My father tried to get his store back, which he didn't, even though he had sent the rent we were renting. We didn't own a house. We were renting. He sent the rent every month. And the store had been occupied by a Nazi. It was very well located in the center of the town. It was occupied by a Nazi bookstore, and after the war, even though we had paid the rent and it was our store, they wouldn't give it back to us, and they only changed the name of the bookstore. And the Nazi guy who was selling the books remained there in place, in the beautiful place. And my father got extremely depressed because we had nothing left, no more money, everything had been dark, underground and so on. With the Baroness, we had some privileges with food because her sister used to bring it from the country, so we had some eggs and some milk sometimes, and they made some bread. But and my brother had been separated from us, but then we all got together, and my parents sent me in Brussels to school, and I found a place to live in and they went back to Antwerp and tried to reopen the store, which they couldn't. And my father got very depressed, and my brother never finished his schooling. And he took care of the whole family. I also had an uncle. My cousins, by the way, did not get deported, and the two boys who belonged to my divorced uncle went back to Paris with their mother after the war. And my uncle also lived between Antwerp and Belgium, and he used to have an apartment house in Antwerp, and he gave us an apartment to live in. And the apartment had been occupied by the English troops, so it was in terrible shape. The building was in terrible shape, and there were two buildings, one in the garden and one somewhere else. Anyway, the little building in the garden we got back, and he put his old secretary, who had also victimized by the war and had lost her husband, put her in another apartment. So the apartment was really, the little apartment house was filled, thanks to my uncle, with people who had been surviving the war, surviving the Holocaust. And so I finished school in Brussels, then I came back to Belgium, and I had had 1 year in the public school in Belgium, and before the war, before the war, and that was very Flemish and very, I believe, anti-Semitic, and so they decided to send me to a private school, for which my uncle paid, I believe.
Now this is before the war?
No. Before the war, I was in the general school, in the high school from the city of Antwerp, and it was very Flemish and sort of anti-Jewish, I think, with anti-Semitic undertones. So I didn't really want to go back there. So I went to a private school which was French-speaking, and my brother had been to the boys' school of the equivalent thing, and my cousin had been there also. And the castle where I was hidden they were all connected. These three entities were connected. So these were French-speaking people and excellent education, and the teachers really tried to help us. And I had another girl with me in the classroom, Alice Polakevich, and she had also been surviving the Holocaust, and she lived across the street from me, and together we took lessons with a professor of mathematics, and eventually we passed the exams to go to the university. They allowed us not to have certain subjects. We had to have just the important subjects to pass and to be able to go to the university. And Alice Polakevich, she became a lawyer, and I went to medical school. And that in the meantime, my brother tried to reopen the chocolate store and so on and so forth. And a lot of other things happened with the store and with the neighbors. One of the neighbors who had a store, the store was in a not so good location, but the next door neighbor was a young man whose parents had been deported, and he had survived in Switzerland. So he had the store of his father, and so my father sort of adopted him, and he's one of the very good close friends of our family, and he lives now in Israel after having spent a few years in Japan. So anyway, so I finished medical school. I married an American student in Belgium. I came once to New York because my then husband, because I eventually divorced him, my then husband had still to finish a few years, and I started to work in Antwerp as a general practitioner, but I worked in the pediatric ward of the hospital, and we had quite a few polio cases, and I saw all kinds of diseases that don't exist anymore thanks to the vaccinations, so that we had whooping cough and all the childhood diseases basically that they now get, that with the tetanus, anti-diphtheria, etc. But we had diphtheria cases, and we had a lot measles, diphtheria, polio. So I worked there, and I had a little private practice, and I also became the doctor for the whatever Jewish community there was, and that's where I became acquainted with Hasidics, and that was quite a revelation to me. Anyway, eventually we came back to America. I divorced my first husband while I was just finishing my internship. I had to take some exam, and then I had to do 1 year of internship at Norwalk Hospital. And while I was at Norwalk Hospital, we divorced. And, or no, I divorced later, I think. I don't remember. No, I think I divorced a little later. But the hospital found a place for me. Well, they knew that there were problems. Anyway, I had one child by then, my older child, and the hospital put me in Bridgeport, Connecticut, in the emergency room. And they gave me there an apartment. And I had the housekeeper from Belgium, which I had brought her to America when we came. And so she was taking care of my son, and he went to nursery school while I was the emergency room doctor in Bridgeport at Park City Hospital. And there I was, when I was at the hospital, when I was doing my training still and finishing at Norwalk Hospital and had been hired by Bridgeport's Park City Hospital, 2 doctors came to pick me up. And these were doctors who were refugees from Middle Europa. They were from Austria, and one was Dr. Rasner and the other one was Dr. Horowitz. They are local people, and you may or may not have known them. Dr. Horowitz was a radiologist, and Dr. Rasner, he and his wife became our best friends. And eventually, I got rid of my first husband, and I met my second husband. Everybody tried to hook us to organize a blind date, and so 3 or 4 different people claim that they did it. The fact is that I probably met my husband through my sister-in-law, who was already a physician, an English physician, married to who was to be my brother-in-law. So I had a blind date, but I was staying with the Rasner's family, and the hospital gave me an apartment. They were finishing an apartment next to the hospital. So anyway, it is during that time that I met my husband on a blind date, and he took me out, and he said to me that he was as good as bread, and I can tell you that he was even better than bread. But that's what he told me at this first meeting. And he took me out. He wanted to take me to a real fancy place. So he went and looked at some restaurants. He said, read the menu, he said, this is not good enough for you. So he took me to another, looked at them, this is not good enough. To make a long story short, we ended up with hamburgers because he didn't find the right type of restaurant. And I went back to Belgium when I finished my contract with Park City Hospital, and my husband came to visit me, and we decided to get married, and he came back to America, And because I was divorced, I couldn't get married in Belgium, so we got married in England. And I had to spend 3 weeks in England before being married there. And I stayed with my sisters-in-law parents. And so, and then we had a marriage in Belgium, a religious marriage in Belgium. And what can I tell you about that? When I got divorced, I needed to have an original. Dr. Horowitz, who had been trained as a rabbi, said that I had to have a get, or whatever, something to get rid of the previous man. So that had been organized already by him. So that's that. And then we had a reception here, and everybody thought that we were getting married, but that was just a reception. And I opened, by the way, I spoke Spanish, I spoke Ladino, and Dr. Rasner, who had fled eventually, he had a long story of fleeing all the countries from Austria. He had been in Cuba, and his Spanish was very good, so he had a large Spanish population of patients.
In
And so-
Bridgeport?
in Bridgeport, and so I became. He loved vacation, so I would cover for him, and I also covered, so not only for Dr. Rasen but also for Dr. Rosenberg, who was one of the Jewish lady doctors, and I covered for her while her husband was still alive, and she, the poor thing, died. And so I used to go to East Main Street. When we got married, East Main Street was their office, and North Avenue was Dr. Rasner's office. And I don't know if I had an office already or not. I don't think. Yes, I did. I think I did. But we had bought a beautiful Jaguar in England when we got married in England. And eventually the Jaguar came, and it was for me. My husband had a little car called a Morgan, and when his mother had seen the car, she said, "Poor darling, why didn't you tell me you can afford a better car?" She didn't know that the Morgan was a very special car. Anyway, he put an ad in the paper when we came with the Jaguar. He said, "Wife cometh, Morgan goeth." And one person came to look at the car and bought it. So we got rid of that one. And then we bought a second-hand car, and so I remember that he would always offer to come and get me when I was at East Main Street in Dr. Rosenberg's office. And I would say, no, you don't have to come. Yes, you have to come. In the meantime, we had already, when this was happening, I believe we had already one child. I don't remember what year it was, but anyway, that was it.
What was Bridgeport like when you set up your practice?
When I
here?
came to Bridgeport, it looked very nice. There were many mansions, and people wore white gloves, and nice little handbags were hanging from their arm, and a hat, and they would go to. I saw them going to church, and I was amazed really about how religious the Americans were. Not just the Catholics, but also the Jews, because I had no really Jewish education whatsoever. I still need to have that done in my life before I die, I guess. And my brother did a bar mitzvah, and the only Jewish holiday that I can remember was in Ladino. And I remember when Passover, and it was 10, 9, 10, this and that. Uno es el Criador. God is only one, right? That's the last of the 10 whatever. So that was my religious background. But I know that we were Jewish, And the reason I know that we were Jewish is that when they spoke about what happened in Turkey in the family, it was, no, this was before Hanukkah, no, it was always referred to with the Jewish holidays. So I knew the names of the holidays, I had no clue what it was, but that was how they referred the calendar. It was before this and it was after that.
How was the Jewish community at the time in Bridgeport when you came here, and how did they receive you?
You know, I had no life experience of anything, nothing, because it was the war, then it was a study, then it was the medical school, where I was always trying to catch up with what I didn't have in high school, and then when I was in Belgium I had my own office also. I was working, my then husband was still going to school, and I was the sustaining thing. So I really had no time for social life. And I cannot tell you how the Jewish community received me, but we were always with the Rasners and the Middle European crowd, sort of, Lester and I. And every night we would go to the Rasners and we would have chat and tea and cookies or whatever it was. And we would go out with the Hungarians to the Hungarian restaurant, and we went with the Rasners on vacation, with friends. Lydia Rasner would stay with the kids, and Fred and us, we went to Mexico. We had some terrific adventures connecting to the war in Belgium while we were in Mexico, so we had a lot of trips together, and I didn't have really a big social thing until my children went to school. So in the meantime, a few years later, besides my son, I also had two daughters, who by the way are wonderful daughters, and my son is wonderful also. To me, now that I am a widow, I must tell you that they take wonderful care of me, and they call me frequently and keep an eye on me, and so on and so forth. And so when we moved to this house, to the house where I am now, everything happened at the same time, so that we bought this house, we built my office attached to the house, my husband bought his office at that time, and we bought a beach house next to my brother-in-law. All of this happened about the same time and period of time, so it was quite hectic.
Tell me about where did you live before you?
We lived on Laurel Avenue in Bridgeport, before here. And
how was it you bought this house?
Oh, this house is a whole story by itself. This is a very. So we were looking for a house where I would be able to have my office, because I was on Laurel Avenue and I had a little office there with my children nearby, so that I could have an eye on them. And we had a full-time housekeeper, generally of Spanish origin, but not always, and very lovely people, especially the Cuban people were very high type. We had one woman living with us with her daughter, and she was a wonderful, very high type person. So we were looking for a house in Fairfield, because the school system wasn't so great in Bridgeport, I was told, and I didn't know the differences of the school systems in general. Anyway, we went and we saw many houses, and I saw this one and I liked it very much. When I came to visit here, they were having a cocktail party. The Smiths. The Smith family had a cocktail party here, and they didn't pay too much attention to me, but I loved the house. I thought it was so beautiful, and it really... So we tried to buy it, and they didn't like to sell to Jews. So when we reached their price, first of all, we offered them a little less, and they didn't want. They said they didn't plan on. They were not people who bargain. So when we offered them the price, rather than selling it to us, they took it off the market. And so we kept on looking and didn't find. And eventually, these people wanted to move to. They wanted to move to. I don't remember. I think they were left for Arizona, and they had to sell the house. And eventually, the real estate person called us and said, "I have good news for you. The person to whom they sold the Park Avenue house just decided not to buy the house, so it's available." And so we got it for cheaper even than what they had asked for originally.
What year was this?
That must have been. I have lived here 40 some years, 45 years, 47 years. You figure it out. So, what year was it? I'm trying to figure that out, and I don't remember. Jackie was born already. Robert went to camp the first year. He must have been 10 years old, 9 or 10 years old, I guess. Yes, because he was going to the school on Capitol Avenue, I think, the corner of, no, it was not there. I don't remember where he was. Anyway,
Okay.
we moved to Fairfield so the school system would be better. And it was. And so in the meantime, the office was finished. We moved into the house. Lester moved his office to Fairfield Avenue. I believe it used to be in Fairfield Avenue, so it was somewhere else on Fairfield Avenue. And he was there practicing independently, but with his brother next door, and so they did everything together. And no, they didn't do together. The cases were not together, but they would send letters. My husband would not talk, was not a big talker, so he would write easier. He would write to his brother, he would write to me. He said, "Why are you writing to me? You're going to see me for supper." He sent me letters, he sent me cards, he sent me funny cards, all kinds of things. He was a fun guy, really. So I came here and I practiced, and my sister-in-law and myself, we had a wonderful mother-in-law, Rose Blank. She was there always for us, so that we could take one day off during the week. We used to go, she and I both went to the 3 hospitals, but she was mostly at Bridgeport Hospital, and she did a lot of deliveries there, up to 60 a year she did. And many of the Spanish people gave their daughters the name Miriam, because she was so much loved and so much. And myself, I became quite a big success in my family practice, which I did for 20 years here.
Your practice was mostly with Spanish-speaking people?
Welfare and Spanish, and some nice Jewish people once in a while, and also still there was some Jewish organization that used to send me patients also. But it was very, and I did some deliveries myself, not as many as my sister-in-law, and we had the same answering service, so that they were so much ingrained in us that if I called them and said, "Can I send my children for supper tonight?" Ask my sister-in-law if I can send my children for supper tonight. The answering service would answer as if it was themselves and say, "Of course you can send them. You send them."
Why were you associated with Park City Hospital? Why not with Bridgeport Hospital?
Because I knew the doctors there, but I was associated with the 3 hospitals. I had privileges in the 3, and I had patients in the 3 hospitals. And in fact, I had my patients here also. I said it was mostly, I did have a lot of welfare and a lot of Spanish, but I had regular Americans also, which to my discovery had all kinds of Polish names and Hungarian names, and they were not neither welfare nor Jewish nor Spanish, right? So yes, I had different ones, and something very interesting as far as Jews is concerned is that I had a lovely lady who was a very devoted Catholic. Her sister was a nun, her brother was a priest. She was really very deep in the religion. And she needed surgery. So I put her in the hospital, and it was decided that she needed a surgical consult, and she called me. That was at St. Vincent's Hospital. She called me and she said, "Come here. Could you, if I need a surgeon, I want you to know I want a Jewish surgeon. Don't put me with a Catholic, because the only thing he's going to do for me is to pray for me. I don't want that. I want somebody who's going to fight for me." So we did.
That's interesting, but is there something about Park City Hospital that was different?
Well, all the Jewish refugees were there, and also I was told that they were not welcome in the beginning. When they created Park City Hospital, they weren't really welcome at Bridgeport Hospital.
Just the refugee Jews or any Jews?
I have no idea which Jews. I don't know which Jews. I have never questioned it anymore. And that's it. So the way I met my husband, the blind date was given to me through my sister-in-law, because Park City Hospital's anesthesist made a big party at the beach club in Fairfield every year or every 2 years, I don't know, or once in a while. Doctors had a lot of parties in those days. All the weekends were filled with cocktail parties and very nice time we all had. And I met my sister-in-law there. And she and I started to chat, and I think she told my brother-in-law to get in touch with me. That's how I met him. So anyway, Grandma Blank was wonderful, and she would bring things to the children, and my niece, Miriam's little daughter, who was about the age of my daughters, would check, what did Grandma bring you on Wednesday? Because I was off on Wednesday and Miriam was out on Thursday, and if we say she brought Pop-Tarts, and when Grandma came and it wasn't Pop-Tarts, it was something else just as evil, I would say, devil dogs. she would get mad at her. So anyway, we had a lot of fun, two families together, really. And we would go out very often on the weekends to supper or to New York to a show. We would go to the Long Wharf Theatre. We did a lot of things together. And that was that.
What was Fairfield like when you moved in here?
When I moved in here, you asked me about the American welcome, or whatever it was, where I told you I had no... So I didn't really develop any of the skills that are needed in the United States. Things that people do in the United States when they meet strangers. And so I started to meet people who were friends, who were parents of my children's friends' parents. And most of them were Jewish in Fairfield. And I got a real inferiority complex, which I have kept until very recently, because they all were telling about when I was at Smith College and at this college and at that, and I felt so belittle, and I didn't know what they were talking about. I didn't know American history. I didn't know anything really very American, because now I was very busy. I became a very, very busy doctor. I used to work till 11 o'clock in my office, and I had calls to make till 11, the calls, returning calls, and making house calls and going to 3 different hospitals. That wasn't, and Lester was very busy also in his office, so that he couldn't talk to his brother. He had to write to him in a hurry. That was faster than starting a conversation. So we were very, very busy. And when we were out with those new friends, I never felt at ease, to tell you the truth. And I don't think I ever developed any close friendship with any of them. On the other hand, I had a rather good friendship with a French lady, who is still my friend, but not as close as we used to be in the past when my husband was alive. And she was a teacher. In fact, there were 2 people, 2 French-speaking people. One was a teacher at the university, and the other one, I don't know where she taught, if she did teach, but she had been a French teacher, and we hired her for my son so that he would learn to speak French and write French properly, because he was French speaking in his early age, but he was forgetting it. And so this, the husband of this woman who gave Robert his French lesson, she had a husband who was also from Europe and who taught at Bridgeport University. So these were, I didn't have close friends really amongst the Jewish parents. I'm not in touch with any of them. My mother-in-law had nieces who would come and visit, and we were relatively close to the nieces. They were very nice nieces. They took good care of my mother-in-law. You know, they were really a very loving family, and they were. My mother-in-law was one of 8 children. And most of them, 7 at least of them, were married and had children and grandchildren, so that when her sister and her husband had their 60th wedding anniversary, they had to make the party in 2 episodes because they couldn't fit everybody in the same hall. So that was the Bridgeport family. Lester had a huge family here. Most of them were here, I think. And when we would walk on Main Street in Bridgeport or on State Street, and somebody said hello from one side of the sidewalks to the other, I would ask Lester, who is this? He said, I don't know. So I decided it must be one of your cousins, which it probably was. And recently I discovered one from Norwalk who was related to my husband. I just rediscovered her recently. So there was a big family here. We used to travel a lot, Lester and I. We went to Morocco, we went to China. It was our last trip before he died. In between we went many times to Italy, France, Europe, where else? Israel, where else did we go? We went on archaeological trips to the Asia Minor. So we had a lot of wonderful trips, and I must say I had a wonderful life with him.
Now, you had a very successful practice here in
Yes.
your office attached to this house.
So I started the weight control here, and in fact, I had started weight control, which I was always obsessed by becoming fat again. I forget to tell you an episode of my life, but that's long ago. It came and went, but it took 1 year out of my. I told you I always was catching up. 1 year out of medical school, because I became paralyzed for several months, 6 months, and then after that I went back to the south of France to recuperate in the winter, because the winter wasn't so bad, but I had to recuperate and get physiotherapy and so on. And as you can see, I can move everything, and you wouldn't know I had been paralyzed, and I have some small sequelae, such as I cannot stretch my arm completely or things like that, but I recuperated completely. And my American family, because I had an aunt whom I didn't know, lived in New York, and I had met her the first time I came to New York before I got married. I met my aunt, and all I can tell you is that she did her dishes the way my mother did her dishes, way from Turkey. How to wash dishes. And they looked alike a little bit, so that was that. And I have some really nice cousins here in America. First degree cousins, they came to get me at the ship when I came the first time. They took me out. They introduced me to an American meal, which was a big steak, which I thought was for all of us. We were 5 of us. But no, they told me, no, this is just for you. Big steak, and was news to me. The contrast and the contact. So I had a lot of things that I found about America. The people were very jovial. Later on they became so jovial that they started to use first names on everybody, and that went a little bit against my grain, and it still does, which I think is rather snotty on my part, but it happens that I don't think that it started with the guy who was cleaning the floors at the hospital, and I wanted to hire him for my office, to clean the office. And I asked him, and then he started to call me Victoria. And, you know, it really didn't sit well with me. I didn't say anything. And later on, everybody started to call me Victoria. And now, if I go to a doctor myself, and they know I'm Dr. Blank, the only place where they call me doctor is at Yale. Because when I go to any doctor here, they say, Victoria, and I have to go in, like anybody else.
Doña Victoria.
Doña Victoria, that's my housekeeper. But, so these are big changes. The other thing is that their chocolates were lousy. The food was, they don't know how to make French fries. They don't know how to do, you know, it was, but the brisket of my mother-in-law was excellent. And we used to have every Sunday a meal with my mother-in-law, who used to forget one of the dishes. She worked the whole week except Thursday and Wednesday. She worked at preparing the Sunday meal, and she always forgot something in her refrigerator. But it was fun. We had a lot of fun, and then we would put our table back together and so on and so forth.
Now, you, as I said, you were very successful here. How did you get into bariatrics?
Oh, I went into bariatrics because I always was afraid to get fat again. I felt so fat in medical school. When you look at my picture, actually, it wasn't that bad, but I was fat. I became fat after the war. As I told you, I ate all that chocolate. And then when I was immobilized with my disease, that also made me gain weight. So that when I went back to medical school, I was heavy, and I was embarrassed to walk in front of everybody. I wanted to be underground. So I saw in my practice how people lost weight, regained weight. I had made the drug companies had asked me to make a study on my patients or organize something for weight control and give out their pills or a placebo, which I did. And I don't remember the outcome, but I had a special Friday afternoon just for the nurses. And all the fat nurses, you know how heavy they are, they would all come to my office and get the pills. And that was it. These were the studies. But I was really interested in weight control, and I used to get the advertisement from Bariatric Society, which taught doctors things about obesity. And while my children were young, I never was able to go, But later on I went, and the first meeting I went was very terrific. It was really great. It was just when they started to find out about the protein sparing modified fast, and George Blackburn of Harvard presented all the results they had between Harvard and MIT. They had done all the studies and it was wonderful, everything was great. And so I started to implement that a little bit on some of my patients in the office, and then I decided I was going to move somewhere else because there was no parking space enough here to put patients. And I moved to Fairfield, to the Post Road, where I have been for 38 years, something about. Yeah. So that's that. So what you were asking me, basically, you had a specific question for me. How did we get there? Do you remember what the question was? Because I don't think I answered the question.
You just did. I asked you, how did you get into bariatrics?
Oh, right, yes, I went to bariatrics, and I went to that meeting and it was wonderful. I also met all their meetings at that time took place in Las Vegas, so it was far away. So I traveled like a big girl all by myself, and that was the second time in my life that I traveled like that, a big distance by myself, because the first time was when I first came here and started my practice. I was afraid I wouldn't have any housekeeper, so I got together with two other ladies. One were married to a psychologist and the other to a pediatrician who unfortunately died. And the three of us made a little business, and we imported people from the islands, and I was the one who organized it with the government of those islands, so that we had the maid center in Westport. The Westport Maid Center was our business, and it lasted about a year or two, and then the government decided we couldn't import them anymore, and the business was closed. And I never got any housekeeper from there myself, but somebody else did. And so when I moved to Fairfield, I took one of the. I had a very big space. Oh, but I wanted to tell you about the meeting in Las Vegas, where I was always with doctors who had that southern accent. And since I am so unknowledgeable about things in America, I really never paid so much attention. To me, they sounded like the accent I used to have myself in Marseilles, maybe, you know, the southern accent. But I didn't, I had a lot of, you know, a little snotty maybe, because we speak English supposedly properly, and these people have this accent, right? And one day they decided to do the meeting in Boulder, Colorado, and I believe that it was the Air Force Academy that was going to entertain us for lunch. And they came and they played wonderful music, Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, etc. And that was lovely. And then they started to play military music. And three guys, we were sitting there, the doctors, three guys got up suddenly. I got this thing here because that was the music of the liberation, and I started to cry all at once. They got up, I got this, and I started to cry. And I was crying, asked me why am I crying, I don't know. I guess I sort of was reliving a little bit the liberation, but mostly thinking with guilt about the way I was thinking about those people, these people who really liberated us from the Germans, these American soldiers, these wonderful guys who came to Europe. And so That was it. So that was one of the things that you should know.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.